What's up, guys? Barrett. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the importance of drum notation. So I know what you're thinking. I've been teaching drums for over 10 years, and I know how drummers are, right? Why do I need to know how to read that? I can just listen to grooves and play them by ear. And that is true. And drumming is mostly ear-based, right? We listen, we feel, and we react when we play drums. But that's only one of our senses, right? And so the more we can incorporate more of our senses into what we're learning and understanding, the better we'll actually understand it. Obviously, we can't taste music or smell it, but if we can see it and hear it, now we have two senses that are then working together. Not only that, but when you can read music and you can read notation and understand a visual representation of what you're playing, it helps you visualize anything you're trying to play. Any groove I teach or come up with or think about playing, I can typically almost always visualize it in my head, and it gives me a much better, more confident, more solidified presence when I play the groove because I know where one is. I know how many measures I'm playing. I know all these sorts of ins and outs that drummers who only listen and feel and hear music might be missing out on. Besides that, and this is the last point that's very important, it's super easy to read drum notation. So do it. Bass drum is on the bottom, just like it is in real life. Snare drum is in the middle, just like it is in real life. Hi-hat, or any cymbal for that matter, is on top. So hi-hat is typically either on this line or above the line, and then all the other cymbals are above that, crash and ride and all that. Now, of course, it takes practice, just like anything else. But how it works is the lines that are connecting things means you play them at the same time together. So this would be a hi-hat and a bass drum together. The next thing you see is just a hi-hat. The next thing you see is a hi-hat on top, but not a bass drum, it's a snare drum. So that's a hi-hat and snare together. And that's pretty much it for this groove. You could think about it as boot-chat, boot-chat. So I'm going to give you a second to look at that, and you try it. Now say we have a variation to what we just played. Well, it's the same thing in the beginning, boot-chat. But here we have boot, boot, two bass drums, chat. See how simple this is? Crazy, huh? I'll take it one step further and explain that most grooves are almost always based upon this idea anyways, where there's a bass on 1 and snare on 2 and 4. Because if we count this is technically called eighth notes, which just means you count with ands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But basically you're always going to have this shell, and it's just going to either have more basses or more snares. So I'll give you a couple of different variations. So here's one variation where it starts out exactly the same, boot, chat, boot, boot, but you have snare, bass, bass. Would sound like this. Now try this idea and see if it sounds the way I'm about to play it. You can obviously pause the video if you need to. Now I only changed one thing here. See if you can find out what it is. And that would sound like this. Ah, we added another bass, right? And what if we add a whole bunch of bass drums? Doof, doof, chat, doof, 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 chat, doof. No big deal. And then if you repeat that, you get a pattern where the bass drums wrap around. Now, that thing I just did there is called an open hi-hat. How would we write that? So an open hi-hat is notated with a little O on top of a hi-hat note. So now what if you have some notes that are outside of the hi-hat? We call that independence. So in this case, this is snare independence. Boom, chat. Chat, chat, chat. So these two snares right here represent the snares that are sort of off of the hi-hat, what we call independence in drumming. I'll show you. So you see those two snares in the middle, just like it's written. Hi-hat, snare, they're off of each other. They're not at the same time. While this would be an example of bass drum independence. Boom, tss, doo, ka. See how this bass drum is apart from everything else? That's what we call bass drum independence. Boom, Cat. Cat. Cool thing about music and drumming is that you can have both. Cat. 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 So this is an example of bass drum independence. This is an example of snare drum independence. So drummers, we do both. We combine them. Now, if you're thinking about fills in the traditional sense, typically you would have a groove that would be like your basic groove for your song, like for your verse or your chorus. And that would be just kind of basically repeated. But then when you have a fill measure in a traditional sense, it would just give you these lines representing the beats that you would just fill in. So fills can be written out, but most of the time, especially in real drum notation that you're going to be using with a group or a band or orchestra or whatever, depends on how complicated or how tributed the music is. Like if it's something that needs to be really specific, like hits, then you'll see a very specific accent for that. Like say in the music that you had hits on 2 and 4 in this specific piece of music, it would just show the slanted lines for the whatever you want to do part. And then the hits would have a little accent note over whatever the rhythm was. So, pa, pa. So this is very important because fills are typically thought of as filling in space and time with something. It's very improvisational. While fills can be learned, and it is actually important to learn different fills that work really well, at the same time, it's also important to just put a metronome on and just practice filling in time. So like in that example, we had to fill up beat 1 with something and beat 3 with something. So that could be something you could do, 1, 2, 3. Obviously, in that case, the music would obviously be telling you, hey, if you're accenting 2 and 4, there's still some groove happening here, and you want it to be not like, I mean, you could, that would actually work as well. But I'm just saying, like, typically you don't want to throw the band off when you're trying to accent on 2 and 4, So, some drummers might even just for something like that. But that's a specific example. So say the fill was written out because it needed to be very specific, or you're reading something like, Rush or John Bonham, where you want to know exactly what they played, right? Then you wouldn't have a G meant for groove, but I'm just saying this is like our groove measure here, and say this is the groove measure going into the fill measure, right? By the way, these are called measures. This is called a time signature. I don't want to get too deep into this today. I'm just showing you the basics, okay? This is a groove measure. If this was the fill measure, I'll show you how this is played. So these are called 16th notes, except for this, that's called a quarter note. The names aren't as important at first, but ticka ticka, okay, picka picka, that's a snare, sort of 4-stroke, digga digga, one enda. Then this is a snare, high tom, floor tom, bass. Shaku-tikum, shaku-tikum. Then we're doing that twice. Shaku-tikum, shaku-tikum, blah. And then a flam at the very end. Digga digga, blacku-tikum, blacku-tikum, blah. So that's very like accenting the 1 for sure, but I'll just give you an example of what that would sound like, all right? Typically, fills are always crashed at the very end on beat 1 of the next measure. So it would end up being... Notice how much space that quarter note has if you really give it its full value, especially at that slower tempo. Notice I'm also giving it a little bit of style by accenting the snare in certain places. Thing is notation in drumming is never really 100% the full picture. You always got to put some sort of musicality to it. Typically, authors don't put 100% of the time into the notation. Drumming is always meant to be heard and felt and sort of interpreted. So thanks for hanging out with me. This is just the basics. I'll let you guys with one last groove here. If you want, play it and tag me in the video, and we'll talk about it. We'll keep talking about it, man. If you want a whole lot more notation, I published a book that has lots and lots of notation in it. You can learn lots more stuff about drumming. The Essential Drummer, link in my bio. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm going to be producing a lot more lesson content on here. I have already like 19 more ideas backlogged. So, yeah. Look forward to learning with you guys, and have a good one, all right?